The lecture hall was enormous. Minho Park had been here for 3 months now, but the size still surprised him every time he walked in. 200 students sat in curved rows, rising up like steps in a stadium. But Minho was different from almost everyone else here. He was human. The other students were aliens. There were tall Valorians with blue skin and crest-like feathers on their heads. There were Kreeth with 6 arms and shells that clicked when they moved. There were Nomarians who looked like they were made of living crystal. There were dozens of other species, all from worlds that had been traveling through space for thousands of years. Minho was one of only 5 humans at the Galactic Naval Academy. Humanity had joined the Galactic Coalition just 3 years ago. Before that, humans didn't even know aliens existed. Now, Minho sat in a classroom learning how to fight wars in space alongside species that had been doing it since before humans invented the wheel. He tried not to think about that too much. It made him feel small. Admiral Velteron stood at the front of the room. He was Valorian, with dark blue skin and silver feathers that rose and fell depending on his mood. Right now, they stood tall and proud. He had fought in 8 wars and won them all. Every student in the room respected him. Some feared him. Today, the Admiral said, his voice coming through a small device that translated his words into every language, we will study the new Dreadnought-class flagship. This ship represents 40 years of work. 12 different species helped design it. It is the most powerful warship ever built. A hologram appeared in the center of the room. The ship rotated slowly, showing every angle. It was beautiful. The hull was smooth and curved, painted in white and gold. Weapons covered its surface like teeth in a shark's mouth. Minho could see the shield generators glowing softly along the sides. The Admiral pointed at different parts of the ship as he talked. The plasma shields can absorb enough damage to destroy a moon. The quantum drives can move the ship faster than anything we've built before. The graviton cannons can crack planets. Students leaned forward, watching carefully. Some took notes on their tablets. Others just stared at the hologram with wide eyes, or whatever they had instead of eyes. Minho watched too. But as he looked, something bothered him. He saw gaps in the armor, places where the thick hull plating just stopped. These gaps were near important parts of the ship, near the weapons, near the shield generators, near the engines. He frowned. Why would anyone design a warship with holes in the armor? At first, he thought he was wrong. Maybe he didn't understand alien ship design. Maybe there was a reason for it that made sense to species that had been building warships for thousands of years. But the more he looked, the more certain he became. Those gaps were a problem, a big problem. Minho raised his hand. The room went quiet. Humans didn't usually speak up in class. They were too new, too uncertain of their place among these ancient civilizations. The other 4 humans at the academy usually just listened and learned. Admiral Velteron's crest feathers flattened slightly. Yes, Human Park? Minho stood up. His heart was beating fast, but he kept his voice steady. Admiral, why are your warships missing armor here? He pointed at the hologram, highlighting the gaps he had noticed. These areas, near the weapon batteries and shield generators. There are gaps in the hull plating. Several students made sounds. A Kreeth in the front row clicked loudly. Minho knew that was how they laughed. The Admiral's crest feathers flattened more. That meant he was being patient with someone he thought was being stupid. Human Park, those are not gaps. Those are carefully designed sections that allow heat to escape. They also help energy move through the ship better. Every Coalition warship has been built this way for 3,000 years. But what happens in a fight? Minho asked. If the shields fail. The shields do not fail, the Admiral interrupted. His voice was still polite, but there was an edge to it now. Shields protect the ship. Armor is secondary. This is basic knowledge. Perhaps human ships are different? The way he said different made it clear what he really meant. Primitive, backward, inferior. Minho felt his face get hot, but he sat down. Around him, students whispered to each other. He heard some of them laughing quietly. After class ended, Minho walked out quickly. He didn't want to talk to anyone. But a voice called his name. Minho, wait! He turned and saw Yuna Choi jogging to catch up with him. She was another human at the academy. Before coming here, she had served on a human warship called the Indomitable. I heard what you said in there, Yuna said when she reached him. You're right to be worried. Am I? Minho asked. Everyone else seems to think I'm an idiot. You're not an idiot. Those gaps in the armor would terrify any human ship designer. Yuna looked around to make sure no one was listening. But we're the new species here, Minho. We've only been in space for a few decades. They've been doing this for thousands of years. Maybe they know something we don't. Maybe, Minho said. But he didn't believe it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those gaps in the armor. He kept imagining what would happen if the shields failed, if weapons hit those unprotected areas, if explosions tore through the inside of the ship. Finally, he got out of bed and went to his desk. He opened his personal computer and started working. He pulled up the design files for the Dreadnought-class ship. Then he started building a simulation. The simulation would show what happened in a fight. He programmed enemy ships that fought differently than coalition warships. Ships that didn't rely only on shields. Ships that used old-fashioned weapons, bullets and missiles and simple explosives, the kind of weapons humans had used before they learned how to make energy shields. The first simulation ran. He watched as the enemy ships fired at the Dreadnought. They focused all their weapons on one spot, overwhelming the shields at that point. The shields flickered and failed for just a moment. In that moment, missiles hit the gaps in the armor. The Dreadnought exploded. Minho ran the simulation again. Same result. He ran it 10 more times with small changes. The Dreadnought died every time. His hands were shaking. This couldn't be right. Could it? Could the most powerful ship in the galaxy have such an obvious weakness? He ran more simulations. 50, 100, 200. Sometimes the Dreadnought won. But most of the time, if the enemy knew where to hit, the great warship died in minutes. By the time the sun rose over the academy, Minho had run over 300 combat simulations. His eyes hurt from staring at the screen. His back hurt from sitting in the chair all night. But now he was certain. The coalition's warships had a fatal flaw. A weakness that could destroy them. And everyone was too proud or too comfortable to see it. The question was, what should he do about it? Who would listen to a human who had been at the academy for only 3 months? Who would believe that ancient, successful designs were wrong? Minho saved his simulation data and closed his computer. He needed to talk to someone who might actually listen. He thought of Professor Hana Kim. She was the only human teacher at the academy. She taught comparative military history. If anyone would take him seriously, it would be her. Minho looked at the time. Classes would start in 2 hours. He had just enough time to shower and eat something before he went to find Professor Kim. He didn't know it yet, but this decision would change everything. Not just for him, but for the entire Galactic Coalition. 3 weeks passed since that day in Admiral Velteron's class. Minho's life had become an obsession. Every free moment, he ran combat simulations on his computer, while other students relaxed or studied normal coursework. Minho tested warship designs against different fighting styles. His grades in other classes started to drop. He barely slept. Yuna noticed and tried to talk to him about it. But Minho couldn't stop. Every simulation showed the same thing. The Coalition's beautiful warships had a weakness that could kill them. Finally, he gathered all his data and went to find Professor Hana Kim. Her office was small and tucked away in a corner of the academy. Books covered every surface, actual paper books that she had brought from Earth. Maps of old human battles hung on the walls. When Minho knocked, she looked up from her desk and smiled. "Minho Park," she said. "I've heard you've been asking uncomfortable questions. News travels fast," Minho said. "In a place like this?" "Always." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me what's bothering you." Minho sat and pulled out his tablet. Professor, I've been running combat simulations. Hundreds of them. I need you to look at something. He showed her his data. Professor Kim was quiet as she reviewed the simulations. Her expression grew more and more serious. She ran through the results 3 times before she spoke. You're saying every coalition warship design has the same problem? She asked. Yes, ma'am. They've built everything around shields. Their whole way of fighting assumes shields will always protect them. Energy redistribution, regeneration rates, power management. Everything focuses on keeping the shields working. Shields are very good protection, Professor Kim said carefully. Until they're not. Minho pulled up one of his simulations. Watch this one. I programmed a fighting style based on how humans fought each other before we had shields. Focused fire on one point to overload the shield in that spot. Then kinetic weapons, old railguns and missiles, to hit the gaps while the shields reset. They watched the simulation together. The coalition dreadnought's shields flared bright blue under the attack. They held for a moment, then flickered. In that tiny gap of time, heavy metal slugs and explosive missiles tore through the unarmored sections. Fires spread inside the ship. Secondary explosions ripped it apart. The whole fight took 4 minutes. Professor Kim sat back in her chair. Her face was pale. They've had thousands of years of peace among themselves, she said quietly. When they fought wars, it was against other species with the same technology. The same fighting styles, shield against shield. But what if they meet an enemy that doesn't fight that way? Minho asked. An enemy that knows how these ships are built? That knows they've been designed the same way for 3,000 years? Professor Kim looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. We need to show this to Admiral Veltaran. Officially. They requested a meeting the next day. Admiral Veltaran agreed to see them, probably out of curiosity more than anything else. His office was large and decorated with weapons from his 8 successful campaigns. He sat behind a desk made of some kind of alien wood that glowed softly. His crest feathers were neutral, neither raised nor flat. Professor Kim, Human Park. He gestured to chairs across from his desk. You said this was urgent. Minho put his tablet on the desk and showed the Admiral his simulations. He explained his findings as clearly as he could. He showed the data, the combat results, the vulnerabilities. Admiral Veltaran watched everything. When Minho finished, the Admiral was quiet for a moment. Human Park, he finally said. You've run simulations, computer programs, theory. But in real combat, determined, no enemy could create enough constant fire to overwhelm modern shield systems, while also using kinetic weapons at the same time. With respect, Admiral, humanity could do it. We did it to each other for decades before we developed energy shields. The Admiral's crest feathers rose. That meant confidence, maybe even arrogance. And yet, Human Park, your species lost 40% of its colony worlds in the Kreeth border conflict last year. We had to save you. Perhaps human fighting tactics are not as good as you think? The words stung because they were partly true. Humanity's first contact with the galaxy had been violent. The Kreeth had attacked human colonies without warning. Humans fought back. But their technology was too primitive. They were losing badly when the Coalition intervened. It was humiliating. It was why humans were still treated like children at the Academy. Minho wanted to argue, but he had no answer for that. Professor Kim stood up. Admiral, we're not saying human tactics are superior. We're saying there's a potential vulnerability that should be investigated. Your concern is noted, the Admiral said, but his tone made it clear the conversation was over. If there's nothing else? They left the office in silence. In the hallway outside, Minho hit the wall with his fist in frustration. He didn't even really listen, Minho said. He heard us, Professor Kim replied. But hearing and believing are different things. We're humans, Minho. We've been in space for 3 years. They've been doing this for thousands of years. Why would they believe us over their own experience? Because we're right. Being right doesn't matter if no one listens. Minho went back to his room that night feeling defeated. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was just a stupid human who didn't understand how real space warfare worked. But 3 days later, everything changed. The alarm woke everyone in the academy before dawn. It was the emergency signal. Something Minho had only heard during drills. But this wasn't a drill. All cadets and staff report to the command center immediately, a voice announced over the speakers. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Minho threw on his uniform and ran. Hundreds of students and teachers flooded the hallways, all heading to the same place. The command center was a massive room, filled with screens and control stations. When Minho arrived, it was already packed with people. Admiral Veltaran stood at the front, facing the largest screen. His crest feathers were completely flat against his head. Minho had learned that meant fear. Quiet, the admiral commanded. The room fell silent. 6 hours ago, our monitoring stations in the outer reach went silent. We thought it was a technical problem. 4 hours ago, we sent a patrol fleet to investigate. That fleet is now destroyed. Shocked murmurs filled the room. Patrol fleets didn't just get destroyed. They were professional military ships with experienced crews. 2 hours ago, we received this transmission before the fleet died. The screen changed. It showed a ship, but not like any ship Minho had ever seen. It was huge and ugly, covered in mismatched armor plating that looked like it came from different ships. Weapons stuck out at odd angles. Some looked advanced, some looked primitive. The whole thing looked like something built from scrap and nightmares. We're calling them the Reavers, Admiral Veltaran continued. We know almost nothing about them. But we know this. They destroyed 7 coalition warships in 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Minho felt ice in his stomach. The survivors reported their weapons before communications were lost. Kinetic accelerators, explosive missiles, directed plasma that burned through hull armor. The admiral paused. All primitive weapons by our standards. The room erupted in confused voices. Primitive weapons shouldn't be able to destroy coalition warships so quickly. Minho's hand shot up. Admiral. Every head turned to look at him. Admiral Veltaran's expression showed annoyance. Human Park. This is not the time. Admiral, those ships won't survive fighting the Reavers. Minho pushed through the crowd to the front. This is exactly what I tried to tell you. The Reavers are using the tactics I predicted. That's impossible. Is it? Minho pulled up his tablet, uploading his data to the main screen. Watch. This is my simulation from 3 weeks ago. The screen showed his combat simulation. Coalition ships with their elegant designs and powerful shields. Enemy ships using sustained kinetic fire and missiles. The coalition ships dying one after another as their shields failed, and kinetic rounds tore through the unarmored gaps. The command center was completely silent. This is just theory, someone finally said. A Kreeth admiral near the front. Computer predictions. A technician at one of the control stations spoke up, his voice shaking. Sir, the data from the patrol fleet just came in. I've run an analysis comparing it to the human simulation. And? Admiral Veltaran asked. 89% match, sir. The silence stretched on. Then Admiral Veltaran turned to look at Minho. His crest feathers were trembling. Human Park, he said slowly. If you were commanding our fleet, what would you do? How would humanity fight this enemy? Quote, Minho took a breath. This was it. They were finally listening. We'd modify the ships, he said. Minho stood in front of the giant screen in the command center, surrounded by hundreds of alien officers and cadets who were all watching him. His heart was pounding, but he kept his voice steady. We need to reinforce the weak points with extra armor, he said. Add protective plating over the gaps near the weapons and shield generators. We need to change how the shields work too. Instead of keeping them on all the time, make them pulse, on and off. That way they can recover faster when they get hit. That would take months, Admiral Veltaran said. His voice was tight. We have days, maybe less. Then we do what we can in the time we have, Minho replied. A Numerian commander, her crystalline body reflecting the light from the screens, leaned forward. The human speaks truth. We have forgotten that shields can fail. We have made ourselves too predictable. Another officer nodded. Then another. Slowly, the mood in the room shifted. Admiral Veltaran looked at Minho for a long moment. His crest feathers slowly rose to a neutral position. Human Park. You are now Commander Park. With field rank authority. You will lead the tactical retrofit team. Assemble whoever you need. We deploy in 72 hours. The next 3 days became a blur of constant work and no sleep. The shipyards of Valorian Prime were massive structures that orbited the planet. Normally, they were quiet places where ships were built slowly and carefully over months or years. Now they became chaotic workplaces running 24 hours a day. Minho found himself leading a team of 30 engineers. Most were aliens with decades of experience. Some clearly didn't want to take orders from a human who had been at the academy for only 3 months. But Admiral Veltaran had made the orders clear, and everyone was too scared of the Reavers to argue much. Yuna joined his team, along with 2 other humans from the academy. Professor Kim came too, offering advice based on her knowledge of human military history. They stood in front of the first ship that needed work, a massive coalition dreadnought called the Eternal Valor. It floated in the dock, held in place by gravity beams. Up close, it was even more beautiful than in the holograms. The white and gold hull gleamed under the work lights. We can't rebuild the entire ship, Yuna said quietly. There's not enough time. We don't rebuild, Minho agreed. We patch it. We cover the gaps with whatever armor we can find. That will add weight. A Valorian engineer protested. It will make the ship slower. Harder to maneuver. It will keep you alive, Minho shot back. These ships were built for peacetime. For fleet actions where everyone fights the same way. They're going to war now. Real war. They started pulling armor plating from everywhere they could find it. Damaged ships in storage yards. Old hull sections from decommissioned vessels. Even some structural plating from the space station itself. It was ugly work. The new armor didn't match the original hull. It had to be welded and bolted into place quickly. Without the careful precision of normal shipbuilding, the beautiful, elegant warships started to look rough and patched together. But they were getting stronger. Minho worked alongside the engineers, learning as he went. He had never actually built a real spaceship before. Everything he knew came from textbooks and simulations. But the alien engineers, once they saw he was willing to work hard and listen to their expertise, started teaching him. A Creeth named Vox showed him how to properly seal hull joints. A Nomarian called Shannara taught him about energy flow through ship systems. They were still suspicious of his ideas, but they were willing to try. The weapons systems needed changes too. Minho had them install more point defense cannons. These were smaller weapons designed to shoot down missiles and incoming fire. The coalition ships didn't have many because they relied on their shields. Minho had them pull old point defense systems from storage and bolt them onto the hulls wherever they could fit. Several ships had their cargo bays converted to carry human-style railguns. These were simple weapons compared to coalition energy cannons. They just accelerated metal slugs to incredible speeds, but they were reliable, and they didn't need much power to operate. On the second day, Admiral Veltaran came to inspect the Eternal Valor. He walked slowly around the ship, looking at all the modifications. His crest feathers kept flattening and rising, a sign of conflicting emotions. "It looks terrible," he finally said. "It looks like a ship that's ready to fight," Minho replied. The Admiral turned to look at him. "You really believe this will work?" "I believe it gives us a better chance than we had before." "That's not very reassuring, Commander Park." "War isn't very reassuring, Admiral." The Admiral's crest feathers rose slightly. It might have been respect, or maybe just acceptance. But fixing the ships was only half the problem. The coalition officers also needed to learn how to fight differently. On the evening of the second day, Minho and Professor Kim gathered 30 ship captains in a simulation room. These were experienced officers, some of them with decades of command experience. They looked skeptical as they took their seats. "We're going to teach you new tactics," Minho began. Ways of fighting that don't depend on your shields being perfect. We've trained for years, one captain said stiffly. Centuries. For some species. And that training assumed your enemy would fight like you do, Professor Kim replied. The Reavers don't. They're going to try to overwhelm your shields with massed fire, then hit your weak points with kinetic weapons. If you fight the way you've been trained, you'll die. They ran simulations. In the first one, a Valorian captain tried to maintain perfect shield coverage while fighting Reaver ships. His ship was torn apart in minutes. You're trying to fight elegantly, Yuna observed. She was helping run the training sessions. You need to fight to win. What does that mean? A Numerian captain asked. Professor Kim pulled up historical records from Earth. This is the Battle of Titan, from our colonial wars. Human ships fighting each other with everything they had. The video showed brutal, desperate combat. Ships damaged and limping, still fighting. Vessels deliberately ramming into each other. Captains making sacrifices to protect their fleet mates. Nothing elegant about it. Just survival. The alien officers watched in shocked silence. Your species fought each other like this? The Valorian captain asked. We fought like we meant it, Professor Kim said quietly. Every battle might be our last. We couldn't afford to be polite about it. Something changed in the room. The alien officers started to understand. They began asking questions. How do you fight without trusting your shields? How do you coordinate attacks to overwhelm specific points? How do you protect weak spots by angling your hull? Minho and his team taught them everything they could. Human tactics learned from decades of desperate warfare. How to sacrifice shield coverage in one area to strengthen another. How to use your ship's armor by turning to deflect incoming fire. How to work together to bring down a stronger enemy. Captain Taeyang Nam arrived on the second day. He commanded the human destroyer, Tenacious, one of 5 human ships joining the coalition fleet. He was older than Minho, with gray hair and scars on his face from the Kreeth War. Heard you're teaching these aliens how to fight dirty, Taeyang said with a slight smile. Just teaching them to survive, Minho replied. Taeyang watched one of the simulation sessions. A Kreeth captain was practicing rapid shield cycling while dodging incoming fire. It was messy and imperfect, but better than before. They're trying hard, Taeyang observed. But this goes against everything they know. Do you think they can learn fast enough? Minho asked. Taeyang was quiet for a moment. In war, you either learn fast or you die fast. They'll figure it out. By the end of the 3rd day, Minho had barely slept in 72 hours. The shipyards were finally finishing the modifications. 31 coalition warships now sat in dock, ready to deploy. They looked nothing like they had 3 days ago. The beautiful white and gold hulls were now covered in mismatched armor plating. Extra weapons stuck out at odd angles. Reinforced sections made the ships look asymmetrical and awkward. They weren't pretty anymore, but they were ready. The fleet assembled in formation outside the shipyards. Minho stood on the bridge of the Eternal Valor, next to Admiral Velteran. Through the viewports, he could see the other ships taking their positions. The 5 human vessels, including the Tenacious, formed up on the fleet's right flank. Yuna was at the tactical station, running final checks on the weapon systems. Other officers moved around the bridge, all focused on their duties. The tension was thick enough to cut. All ships report ready, a communications officer announced. Admiral Velteran looked at the fleet displayed on the tactical screens. Then he looked at Minho. 3 days ago, I thought you were a foolish human asking stupid questions, the Admiral said. I was wrong. I apologize. We're all coalition now, Minho replied. Indeed. The Admiral turned to the helm officer. Set course for the Delvin system. Maximum speed. The fleet began to move, accelerating toward the distant star system where the Reavers waited. Minho watched the stars streak past as they entered faster than light travel. Somewhere ahead, an enemy fleet that had destroyed coalition ships with ease was waiting, an enemy that thought they knew how coalition forces would fight. But the coalition had changed. In 3 desperate days, they had learned to fight like humans, to fight dirty, to fight, to survive. Minho just hoped it would be enough. The journey to the Delvin system took 18 hours. Minho tried to sleep during the trip but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw simulations of ships exploding. He kept wondering if he had made the right choices. If the modifications would actually work. If he had just sent thousands of people to their deaths based on his theories. He wasn't alone in his worry. Walking through the corridors of the Eternal Valor, he saw crew members checking and rechecking their equipment. Some prayed to whatever gods their species believed in. Others sat in small groups, talking quietly. Everyone knew what was coming. Yuna found him in the observation deck, staring out at the stars streaming past. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Every time I try, I think about all the ways this could go wrong," Minho admitted. "That's command," Yuna said, sitting next to him. "My captain on the Indomitable told me once that if you're not scared before a battle, you're either stupid or you don't understand what's about to happen." "Were you scared during the Kreeth War?" "Terrified. Every single time." She looked out at the stars. "But we fought anyway." "That's what you do. The Kreeth nearly wiped us out. But they didn't. We survived. We're still here." She turned to look at him. "And now we're about to help save species that have been in space for thousands of years. How's that for humanity, making its mark?" Minho managed a small smile. "When you put it that way. Try to rest, Minho. You'll need your energy." He did try, and eventually managed a few hours of fitful sleep in his quarters. When they arrived at the Delvin system, alarms brought everyone to battle stations. Minho rushed to the bridge, still putting on his uniform jacket. The bridge was already full of activity. Officers at their stations, screens showing tactical data. Admiral Velteron stood in the center, his crest feathers flat against his head. "Report. 23 Reaver ships detected," the sensor officer called out. "Various sizes. They're on a direct approach vector. No formation discipline." Minho moved to the tactical display next to Yuna. The Reaver fleet was spread out in a loose cluster, moving straight toward them. No elegant formations. No careful positioning. Just a swarm of predators moving toward prey. "They don't need formations," Minho said quietly. "They know how coalition ships usually fight. They expect us to stay in neat lines, maintain perfect shield coverage, and engage at long range with energy weapons. Then we surprise them," Admiral Veltaran said, having heard him. He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships. This is Admiral Veltaran. Prepare to execute Plan Minho." Despite the tension, several officers on the bridge smiled. That's what they had started calling the new tactics. Plan Minho. "Enemy fleet at 50,000 kilometers, the sensor officer announced. 45,000. 40,000. "All ships, activate armor protocols," the admiral ordered. "Shields to pulse pattern." Minho watched the tactical display as the coalition fleet responded. Instead of the usual tight formation, ships spread out into smaller groups. The human ships, led by Captain Taeyong's Tenacious, took position on the flank. 30,000 kilometers. Reavers are opening fire. On the screens, Minho saw the Reaver fleet unleash its weapons. Kinetic rounds by the thousands, moving at incredible speeds. Missiles with explosive warheads. Plasma bursts that looked crude, but deadly. This was the moment. This would show if all their work had mattered. "Brace for impact," someone shouted. The first barrage hit. The Eternal Valor shuddered as kinetic rounds hammered into the hull. But instead of punching through gaps in the armor like they would have a week ago, they hit the new plating Minho's team had installed. Sparks flew. Metal shrieked. But the hull held. Shields at 60% and holding. Yuna called out. Point defense taking out 80% of missiles. Around the fleet, other ships were having similar results. The Reaver opening attack, designed to overwhelm shields and exploit gaps, was being absorbed by armor and shot down by point defense. The Reavers seemed to hesitate, as if confused. "Return fire," Admiral Velteron commanded. "All weapons, target their lead ship, concentrated barrage. All ships, focus fire on target designated Alpha 1, Minho added into the tactical channel. Sustained fire on these coordinates. The coalition fleet opened fire. But not the spread-out, elegant energy weapon volleys they usually used. This was focused, brutal, and overwhelming. Every ship aimed at the same target, the largest Reaver vessel. The Reaver ship's shields were strong, stolen Coalition technology. They flared bright blue as energy weapons hit them. They held for several seconds, but the Coalition fleet didn't stop firing. Energy beams and plasma bolts kept hammering the same spot. The Reaver shields flickered, then failed for just a moment. "Now, railguns fire," Minho ordered. Captain Taeyong's Tenacious and 2 Coalition cruisers that had been fitted with railguns fired. Heavy metal slugs, moving at a fraction of light speed, crossed the distance in seconds. They punched through the flickering shields and tore into the Reaver ship's hull. The Reaver ship didn't explode in a dramatic fireball. It just stopped. Atmosphere vented from dozens of holes. Its lights went out. It began to drift. "Target Alpha 1 destroyed," Yuna reported, her voice showing surprise. The other Reaver ships broke their loose formation and scattered, clearly not expecting this response. "They're regrouping," the sensor officer called. "Changing tactics." "So do we," Minho said. He pulled up a formation pattern on the tactical display. "All ships. Execute Wolfpack Pattern 7. Wolfpack Pattern 7 was pure human tactics. Instead of one big formation, the fleet broke into small groups of 3 or 4 ships. Each group operated independently, supporting each other, constantly moving. Admiral Veltaran watched the fleet scatter across his screens. This went against everything he had been taught about proper fleet discipline. But he trusted it. "Execute the humans' orders," he confirmed. What followed was 40 minutes of the most intense combat the galaxy had seen in thousands of years. The Reavers adapted quickly. They focused fire on individual ships, trying to overwhelm them one at a time. They changed their attack patterns, coming in from multiple angles. But every time they tried to exploit what should have been Coalition weaknesses, they found armor instead of gaps. Every time they tried to overwhelm shields with massed fire, they faced pulsed barriers that recovered faster than expected. In the 3rd minute of combat, a Kreeth cruiser took heavy damage, its shields failing. But its captain did something no Coalition officer would have done before this week. He rotated his ship, presenting the heavily armored sections to the enemy while his shields recharged. The Reaver fire bounced off the reinforced hull. In the 7th minute, a Valorian destroyer and a human corvette coordinated an attack on a Reaver battleship. They came at it from different angles, forcing it to split its shield coverage. When gaps appeared, both ships fired everything they had into the weak spot. Captain Taeyong and the Tenacious fought with particular ferocity. At minute 15, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He dropped his shields completely, diverted all power to engines and weapons, and made a direct run at a Reaver cruiser. "What's he doing?" Admiral Veltaran demanded. "Human tactics," Minho said quietly. The Tenacious came in at point-blank range, only 2,000 kilometers from the Reaver ship. At that distance, it unleashed every weapon it had: railguns, missiles, energy weapons, everything firing at once. The Reaver cruiser's shields couldn't handle that much firepower at that close range. They collapsed, and the Tenacious's weapons tore the ship apart. But the Tenacious didn't escape unscathed. Reaver return fire damaged its engines and punched holes in its armor. "Tenacious is limping back to the fleet," Yuna reported. "Heavy damage but still flying." Minho watched the tactical display, tracking multiple battles happening simultaneously. Coalition ships were taking damage. Some were badly hurt. But they were surviving. They were fighting back effectively. The Reavers began to fall back. They had entered this fight expecting easy prey. Instead, they found an enemy that knew how to hurt them. At minute 32, 3 more Reaver ships were destroyed by coordinated Coalition attacks. At minute 37, a Reaver battleship took critical damage and began to retreat. By minute 40, the remaining Reaver ships broke off completely and fled the system at maximum speed. The Coalition fleet didn't chase them. They were too damaged, too exhausted. The Bridge of the Eternal Valor was silent, except for the sound of damage reports and casualty counts coming in. Minho stared at the tactical display, barely believing what he was seeing. They had won. Final count, Admiral Veltaran said, his voice tired. What did we lose? 8 ships destroyed, a voice reported. 11 more with heavy damage. Estimated casualties. Still being calculated. 8 ships, that was 8 crews, thousands of lives. But they had faced an enemy that had destroyed 7 ships in 12 minutes before. An enemy that should have wiped them out. Admiral Veltaran turned to Minho. His crest feathers were fully raised, the highest sign of respect his species could show. Commander Park, he said formally. On behalf of the Galactic Coalition, we owe humanity an apology, and our deepest thanks. Minho shook his head. We're all Coalition now, Admiral. We just had different experiences to share. Incoming transmission from Coalition Command, the communications officer interrupted. They want to know. They want to know if we can retrofit the rest of the fleet. They're calling it the Park Protocol. The Admiral looked at Minho with an expression that might have been a smile. It seems, Commander, that you have a great deal of work ahead of you. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Delvin. Minho stood at the front of the same lecture hall where this had all begun. But everything was different now. He wasn't a student anymore. He wore the rank insignia of a commander on his uniform, and behind him on the wall hung a medal given to him by the Coalition Council itself. The lecture hall was packed, 200 students, just like before. But this time, they all leaned forward in their seats, paying complete attention. This time, no one would laugh at the human. Minho activated the holographic display. A ship appeared, rotating slowly in the air. It was beautiful, but beautiful in a new way. Not the smooth, elegant designs of the old Coalition warships. This one had character, strength. It combined the flowing lines of advanced technology with practical armor plating and redundant systems. This is the Unity-class cruiser, Minho said. It represents 6 months of work by engineers from 20 different species. It combines Coalition energy technology with human armor doctrine. Advanced shields with practical protection. 3,000 years of experience with lessons learned from humanity's wars. A Valorian student raised her limb. Commander Park, can you explain the armor configuration on sections C4 through C9? Minho smiled. Good question. Let me show you. He zoomed in on the sections the student mentioned. Notice how the armor plating overlaps here? That's a human design principle. Even if the shields fail and one plate gets damaged, there's another layer behind it. We call it redundant protection. But doesn't that add weight? Another student asked. A creath this time. Yes, it does. About 8% more mass than the old designs. But that weight buys us survivability. The ship is slightly slower, but it can take a hit and keep fighting. More hands went up. Questions about shield cycling patterns. About weapon placement. About the new tactical doctrines being taught throughout the Coalition fleet. Minho answered them all patiently, drawing on 6 months of experience retrofitting hundreds of warships. After the Battle of Delvin, the Coalition had realized the truth. Their ship designs had been optimized for a specific kind of warfare that no longer existed. They had grown comfortable, predictable. The Reavers had nearly destroyed them because of that complacency. But they had learned. Every Coalition shipyard was now building vessels based on the new principles. Armor and shields together. Multiple layers of protection. Weapons systems designed for flexibility. Not just overwhelming power. Combat doctrines that emphasized adaptation over rigid formations. They were calling it the Park Protocol. But Minho knew it was bigger than just him. It was humanity's gift to the Coalition. Bought with the blood of human soldiers who had learned to fight dirty out of necessity. At the back of the lecture hall, Admiral Veltaran watched. His crest feathers were raised in what Minho had learned was approval. Next to him stood Professor Hana Kim, wearing her own new rank insignia. She had been promoted too, now heading the entire Comparative Military Studies department. After the class ended, students crowded around Minho, asking more questions. Not mocking him this time. Learning from him. He spent an hour answering before finally making his way to where the Admiral and Professor Kim waited. You're a natural teacher, Professor Kim said with a smile. I learned from the best, Minho replied, nodding to her. Admiral Velteron's translator crackled. Walk with me, Commander. Both of you. They left the lecture hall and walked through the academy grounds. It was evening, and Valorian Prime's 3 moons were rising over the distant mountains. The academy looked the same as it had 6 months ago, but somehow everything felt different. The council has made a decision, the admiral said. They want to establish a new branch of coalition military education. Advanced Combat Doctrine Studies. It will teach officers from all species how to think flexibly, how to learn from each other's experiences, how to adapt to unexpected threats. That sounds like a good idea, Minho said. They want you to run it. Minho stopped walking. Me? Sir, you're just the human who saved the coalition from its own arrogance, the admiral interrupted. You saw a problem that thousands of experienced officers missed. You had the courage to speak up when everyone thought you were wrong, and you found a solution that has changed how we think about warfare. I had help. Yuna, Professor Kim, Captain Taeyang, everyone who... Yes, you had help. Good commanders always do. The admiral's crest feathers flattened slightly, becoming more serious. But you asked the question that started everything. Minho Park, in a quiet classroom, you asked why our warships had gaps in their armor. That simple question changed the galaxy. They reached an observation platform overlooking the shipyards in orbit. Through telescopes mounted on the railing, they could see dozens of ships under construction. Unity-class cruisers, most of them. But also, new designs, experimental vessels that combined ideas from multiple species. The Reavers are still out there, Professor Kim said quietly. The fleet that attacked us was just the first. Intelligence reports say there are more of them. Many more, and when they come back, they'll know our new tactics, Minho added. Exactly. Admiral Velteron looked up at the ships being built. Which is why we can never stop learning. Never stop adapting. That's the real lesson you taught us, Commander. Not just how to build better ships, but how to think better, how to question assumptions, how to learn from anyone who has wisdom to share, no matter how new they are to space. A familiar voice called out behind them. There you are. Yuna jogged up to the platform. She was in uniform now too, with lieutenant insignia. After the battle, she had been assigned to the Eternal Valor permanently as senior tactical officer. Sorry I'm late. The admiral's ship just got back from the outer reach. She looked excited. Sir, we found something. Wreckage from a Reaver ship. The one we destroyed at Delvin. And, the admiral asked, their technology is mostly stolen. We identified components from at least 8 different species. Some we recognize, some we don't. But here's the interesting part. She pulled out a tablet, showing images of strange symbols on hull fragments. These markings aren't random, they're coordinates, jump points. We think we found where they're coming from. Minho studied the images. If they knew where the Reavers were based, they could prepare. Maybe even strike first instead of waiting to be attacked. The Council is organizing an expedition, Admiral Velteron said. A task force to investigate. They want experienced officers who understand the new combat doctrines. He looked at Minho meaningfully. You want me to go? Minho said. The choice is yours, Commander. You can stay here. Build the new training program. Teach the next generation. Or, you can join the task force and face the Reavers again. Minho looked out at the ships being built in orbit. Beautiful vessels. Strong vessels. Ready for whatever came next. Then, he looked at his friends standing with him. Yuna, eager for another chance to fight. Professor Kim, whose knowledge of military history would be invaluable on a long mission. Admiral Veltaran, who had learned to respect humans and now wanted to learn more. When do we leave? Minho asked. The admiral's crest feathers rose high. 2 weeks. Time enough to assemble the fleet and finish preparations. Then I'll be ready. They stood together on the observation platform as the sun set over Valorian Prime. Somewhere, out in the vast galaxy, the Reavers were regrouping, planning their next attack. Other threats probably existed too. Species the Coalition hadn't met yet, dangers they couldn't predict. But for the first time in thousands of years, the Coalition was ready to face the unknown. Not with arrogance or complacency, but with humility and the willingness to learn. All because one human had asked a simple question. That night, Minho returned to his quarters and found a message waiting. It was from Earth, from the Human Fleet Command. They had heard about the Battle of Delvan, about the Park Protocol, about how one of their own had changed Coalition warfare. The message was simple. You made us proud. Come home when you can. We'll be waiting. Minho saved the message but didn't respond yet. He would, eventually. But right now, his home was here. On Valorian Prime, teaching alien students how to think differently, learning from species that had been in space for millennia, preparing for the next threat, whatever it might be. He thought back to that day in Admiral Velteron's class, when he had raised his hand and asked about the gaps in the armor, when everyone had gone quiet and looked at him like he was stupid. He remembered being scared, being uncertain, wondering if he should just keep his mouth shut and not cause trouble. He was glad he hadn't. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is ask a simple question. Why are your warships missing armor here? 3,000 years of experience couldn't answer that question, because no one had thought to ask it, but a human did. A species that had only been in space for a few decades, that had learned warfare through brutal necessity, that knew what it meant to fight for survival. And in asking that question, humanity had found its place in the galaxy. Not as the most advanced species, not as the most powerful, but as the ones willing to see what others had missed, to question what everyone else accepted, to learn from anyone, and to teach what they had learned. The class had been quiet until the human asked a question, and with that question, everything changed. Minho looked out his window at the stars. Somewhere out there, challenges waited. The Reavers were regrouping. Other threats existed. The galaxy was dangerous and vast and full of unknowns, but the Coalition was ready now, and humanity was part of that readiness. He smiled and began packing for the expedition. 2 weeks until they left. 2 weeks to prepare for whatever came next. The human had asked his question. The galaxy had listened. And now, together, they would face the future. Not with certainty or arrogance, but with wisdom earned through hard lessons and shared experience. That was enough. That would always be enough.